Welcome to Whitefields Community Church Sermon Extra. This is a video where every week we go a little bit deeper on the sermon from this past Sunday at Whitefields Community Church here in Longmont, Colorado. My name is Cady. I'm the lead pastor at Whitefields Community Church. I'm here with Payne, our worship pastor at Whitefields Community Church. And Mike, this week we switched seats, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
Why did we do that?
Well, you were off in faraway lands teaching, Broomfield, guest teaching, and also had your dissertation to finish.
That was a big part of it, yeah.
So I was happy to fill in.
And so, Mike, your message was called Provision in the Midst of Famine. I listened to it while I was driving down Highway 287. I listened live, which was pretty cool. And then I got here and I actually sat in the back at the sound booth for probably the last 15 minutes or so of the sermon. And but I had also seen your notes and stuff. So I know a lot about what you talked about. We were studying 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 38 through 44. Yeah. And again, provision in the midst of famine. We looked at two stories. One was in regard to some poisoned stew, and the other one was in regard to provision of flour. But we know both of these happened during a time of famine in the land, and God provided miraculously, which was amazing. But there's a really important principle we saw in there, and that was the principle of first fruits. And you tied that in, Mike, to the idea of tithing. And one of the questions people often ask is tithing required in the New Testament? Is tithing something that Christians should do or ought to do or are even required to do? Maybe you could share a little more on that, and we can just talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely caught my eye, that idea of first fruits, and so I really wanted to, take some time, especially since this man came from this pagan city in northern Israel and brought it in the time of famine. He still brought the first fruits, the tenth, or the tithe, as the Bible refers to it. And I made that statement that we in the New Testament church are not under the law of Moses like he was. And but if you look at, and it's a valid question, if you look at tithing as a whole, tithing began before the Old Testament law. And with Abraham, we see Abraham giving a tenth to Melchizedek there. And so that's always a valid question. Well, then how does that carry over to New Testament? Are we under that same law of giving a tenth, or are we not? Is that something that ceased with the Old Testament when Jesus came and fulfilled that? And I talked about, even Jesus being referred to as the first fruits, And I think when you come away from it, and I made that, statement in there, I think tithing and the tenth is a great place to start. And it's not mentioned in the New Testament, but I think the idea of us being generous givers and the fact that we've become new creations and that we've become the whole thing of the Old Testament was pointing to Jesus coming, fulfilling the Old Testament law and everything like that. He created a different standard, and I think that carries over into tithing as well. And he takes it to the next level. So it's not. So if you ask me, are we supposed to tithe in the New Testament? I would say no. We're supposed to give all. I think that's God's asked all of us. He's not asked 10% or 15% or 5%. He's asked for all of us. And I think we get caught up maybe in the financial part of it. And of course, that's a big thing. Jesus spoke about money a lot, and that's, of course, a big stumbling block for us. Our money decides our passions. What we spend our money on our passions. And while many people spend their money on their bills too, but we do put our money where our desires are, and God says, I want, your desire to be upon me. And so I think generous givers is the standard that we're given, and the New Testament bears that out. God wants all of us, and Paul talked about the tithe, he talked about giving and the church that gave and those kind of things. There's so many examples, but the tenth, the tithe, if we were to drill it down, I don't think it can be found in the New Testament, but I think the idea that we're to give all and give more and give as God calls us is to be found in the New Testament.
Yeah, and would you say it seems that what people tend to do, the kind of our default as human beings in this area is we tend to say, okay, well, where's the line? What's the minimum requirement that I have to do? And I think a lot of times when people ask, do I have to tithe? What they're really asking is, what's the minimum I have to do to like be on God's good graces or to, tick the box, so to say. But you're saying that rather than reductionism, right, and saying like, what's the minimum I have to do? That's the wrong question to be asking completely. Is that?
That's completely, yeah. I think in the Old Testament, there's so many different laws, and Jesus even caught the Pharisees out on that. He says, well, you tithe the 10% of your herbs and your spices and all your mint and everything like that, but you've missed the entire point, and you've missed me, and so I think a lot of people could get caught up, why I tithe my 10%, but you miss Jesus. And I think when people get Jesus, they give a lot more than 10%.
Yeah, and so another one of these that people will do, and again, you got to wonder about the motivation behind it, right? So when people are like, well, I don't have to tithe because we're not under the law. Well, again, what's the motivation? Is the motivation coming from a spirit of generosity and giving all, or is the motivation coming from, I don't have to do this thing because I'm not under the law? In other words, what motivates you to not want to do that, right? First of all.
Yeah.
But here's the other thing. This idea that we're not under the law, I think that has to be a little bit explained, right? Because what does it mean that we're not under the law? Here's what it means. If you look at the New Testament, when it talks about not being under the law, it is talking about that our relationship to the law has fundamentally changed in Christ. And that is this, that it is no longer the means of our justification. And yet, references to, none of us would say, hey, murder, by the law said don't murder. Hey, but we're no longer under the law, so let's go murder people, right? Or, hey, now that we're not under the law, let's just lie. Let's just covet things. And so the point here is that being under the law, not being under the law, it means that our relationship to the law has fundamentally changed. No longer is it our means of justification, but yet it still reflects the heart of God, and therefore it's a way that we can have a guideline for what God values and what matters to God.
Yeah, and I really love that passage in Malachi. There was so much in there. Just in that verse 3, you could spend a whole sermon in there. But the fact that the God says, bring their tithe and bring it into the storeroom, and will I not bless you, that you lack absolutely nothing. And God says, test me in that. And I think, in the New Testament, God's like, I've given you my son. I've given you've given you eternity. In the Old Testament, it was like, they followed these laws, and it was still not, completely sure. We have surety in Jesus Christ, and sons and daughters of the living God. What do I want to do for my Father? I want to give him everything. I'm not going to be splicing up and cutting up my little 10%. I'm going to do everything that I want to give to the Lord, And so I think that's the heart, as you were talking about. Our relationship to the law has fundamentally changed because we are now sons and daughters of the living God. And the way we react to the law, it's something we do out of love, not out of obligation. And I think that's the thing. It's 10% speaks to me of obligation. All of me speaks to me of love. And I think that's the essential difference,
That's a great point. And one last thought on this is that what we read about in the New Testament is that Paul praises the believers from Macedonia, which was historically a poorer region. And he praises these believers from Macedonia, and he says that they gave out of their lack rather than out of their abundance. And that's really interesting because I think where a lot of people go with the whole idea of giving is they say, well, I don't have that much, and so maybe I'll give if I have something left over. But the first fruits thing, right, there's a biblical principle that we see throughout the Bible, is give God the first and the best, and then live off of the rest. And when you do that, it changes the way that you live, right? It changes the things that you spend money on. And it, because you're working with less because you've invested into something. But I think that one of the questions I'm often asked is, should I still give even if I'm in debt? Let's say I have thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Should I still give to the work of God? Should I still give to the church or give to missions or whatever I give to? Should I still do those things if I'm struggling to make ends meet? And my answer is always yes. But what's your answer, Mike?
Well, my answer is that, we don't want to be in debt. So, we don't want to default to the state. I think you need to be working off your debt, and that's a whole nother question of whether we should be in debt or not. But I think, you've got to be going both ways. Try and pay that debt off, also give to the Lord. I think that, again, that's where the idea of 10% and all those kind of things, like sometimes the situation is like, do I give to the church, or do I feed my family? Or does God say, give to church and I will feed your family? I think sometimes those situations are questions of prayer, but God says, test me, And I think Christians who live in that realm of giving all the time, I have met very, very few who are without. God always, and I know as a missionary for many, many years, I was always in the negative, but I always gave, and the Lord always blessed. And, so from that experience, God says, test me. So I would say, if somebody asks that question, I'm in debt, well, test the Lord, give unto the Lord and see him, take care of that debt, and are you in debt for your own, fault, or is it something you have to go? You have to get your tires changed in your car or something like that. Again, it's a trust question. God says, test me, Yeah,
well, and the number of Americans who live in constant consumer debt is, it's something like 70-something% who carry a balance on their credit card.
Average is $15,000 for the American.
Yeah, if you were to say that if you carry a balance on your credit card, then don't give to God, then that would disqualify like
most of America.
3/4 of America. So I think it has to be, as you're paying your debts, we also want to be giving. I know that's what we did. We went through a process a couple of years ago after having moved to the U.S. where we got into debt. A lot of it wasn't because we were just buying stuff. We went through an adoption that cost us, a lot of money, and we ended up in debt. But we ended up doing a class here at church, and it was kind of a plan to get out of debt, all that stuff. So we did it ourselves, and we ended up getting out of debt. But the entire time, as we worked our way out of debt, we were also giving, and we gave 10% to the work of God in the church and all that. And I can testify to the fact that that it changed my way of spending, and it changed the things that we prioritized. And it was a 100% good thing, and I would absolutely do it again. And we continue, of course, to give in that way. But I love the quote that you used on Sunday from John Corson, where he says, a great quote, giving or tithing is not God's way of raising money. It's God's way of raising kids. And we are those kids. Yeah. So good stuff. Thank you, Mike, for teaching us past Sunday. Guys, if you haven't heard the message, what are you doing? Get over there and listen to the message. You can listen to it on our podcast, which can be found on all the podcast platforms. If you use Apple Podcasts, if you use Google Podcasts, we're up on both. If you listen to Spotify, you can find us on Spotify. Go ahead and follow us and listen to us, our podcast on Spotify. And you can also listen to us on Overcast and any podcast apps that you use. And if you want to listen, if you're on YouTube, click right here and listen to the message on YouTube, watch it again, or click here and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be with you guys with our next sermon extra next week. God bless.